in this field, all these notifications, you guys. She's been working in the field for like 30 years. And as we were thinking about what should she talk about, she was, sharing about people she's worked with that are struggling with homelessness, addiction, generational trauma, multiple life disruptions. And we know that trauma is the root cause of so much addiction, right? A big reason people are using drugs or alcohol is to cope with trauma. It's really hard. So just thinking about when you are acutely in trauma, it's not over, you're still in it. Survival mode is what we do. And that works really good in the short term, like so many other coping mechanisms, but long term, it's going to have some consequences. So I'm so excited to have Abby talk about this because she's seen like such a kind of span of time and how it impacts and what that's going to mean and what that looks like. And I'm super excited to hear what she has to say. She's going to have me monitor the chat. And I know she has slides, right? I will turn, Abby, any other directions before I mute myself?
Nope, I'm not going to watch I'll only be able to watch the chat if I leave it on, which I find very distracting. So Amy, if there's a question or something, wave to me so I can pull it up to figure out what we're going off onto.
Okay, that sounds great. And then, so people already know, but if you could, it looks like everybody has their microphone off if you're not speaking, so we don't have any reverb or anything, and we are recording. And Abby, I'm gonna zip it and turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for taking time out of your days to come and listen to me. Amy's very kind. I've actually recently redone the math, and I'm old, and I've been doing this for over 40 years now. So I appreciate the 10 years grace, Amy. Thank you. And predominantly, I work with children and subsequently parents of children. For years, I spent a lot of time training early childhood educators, and one of the things that became incredibly clear to me, and Amy and I talked about when we were first sort of constructing what this was going to look like, was the contagion of trauma and what we in the business call vicarious trauma. And I was really struck one day by a director who I was talking to on the phone as I was driving, because I live on Cape Cod. It would be nice if the sun were more cooperative. You could be looking out at Buzzards Bay. But, and I drive to Worcester, or I did until all this new stuff happened, every day. And I would tell people, you can get me from 6 to 8 in the morning. You can get me from 6 to 8 at night. And there's no way I can get away from you. I'm stuck in my car driving. And I was talking to this director, and she was incredibly panicked because there had been a shooting reasonably close to her center. And she was waiting to find out if it was any members of, the families that were involved in her center, and how difficult that was, and how she didn't want to go home from, drive home yet, and was really stuck in this place of waiting for this. And it really struck me as how much vicarious trauma can really impact people, and how little anybody was doing, talking, especially to early educators and other people in the field. We were talking to people who work directly with trauma, crisis management people, but we weren't really talking about it to other people. And then again, when Amy and I were talking, I thought about the focus we've had on those first responders and during this crisis, and how we have looked at what their needs were. And I reached out to a lot of my colleagues in the beginning of this who treat more adults, and I said, what's going on with the first responders? Because in another life, I was a first responder. And they were talking about, their coping strategies have been jokingly, I go home and, it's always great. My therapist is called Rosé or Chateau or one of the other bottles. And, and I thought to myself, 5.5 glasses of wine to every bottle. And that's a lot of wine to be drinking. and not talking about what's going on. So it's a vast group that works with trauma and how trauma impacts our lives and how difficult it is in the business I work in, because the only diagnosis that exists in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is a wonderful book and enables me to get paid because insurance companies use the codes. But PTSD is the only one that's in there. Nobody actually talks about trauma when it's happening. Because the theory is we can't do a lot of work with trauma in the impact until things settle down. But in the last couple of years, we've done incredible amounts of what we now call anecdotal research, because we don't have the opportunity to get a lot of it peer reviewed yet and looked at because we were in the midst. And one of the most important pieces that came out of it about 6 weeks ago that I was reading is that we have now got actual brain scans which actually look at the synaptic connections that are going on in our brains. And we are lucky enough right now that we have had scans of people prior to trauma and post-trauma. And we now know absolutely scientifically that those synaptic connections change, which is much simpler to be described as we filter information through different parts of our brain, post-trauma and during trauma. So what happens during this is we move into a survival mode. And one of the most interesting pieces about survival mode is it isn't learning mode. Survival mode has a very different perspective that it puts our brain into because we're surviving. People aren't learning too much when they're actually just surviving. They are looking at pieces of information that already exist in their brain, behaviors that already exist, solution-based ideas that already exist that may not be applicable, may not be useful, may not even be very healthy. They just exist. And they take up all the brain real estate, which completely reduces the ability to take on new information, to assess new information, and to change how we do this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma. Most people have heard about how we react to trauma. And typically it was like, oh, well, it's either the flight, run away, or the fight, the take on the action of whatever's happening. And then we subsequently added, because we knew that we had watched people freeze. So instead of the 2 Fs, it became the 3 Fs. Those are the F words that people use a lot, and I think are probably as damaging as the F word we don't use a lot. And during times of crisis and chaos and traumatic experiences, we enter into survival mode. I think back to 2.5 years ago, well, 2 years ago and a month, on Friday the 13th, when the owner of the practice I worked in called me and said, cancel all your clients for Monday, and I don't know what we're doing, I'll let you know. And I said, well, I'm in a school in Worcester on Monday. And she was like, yeah, they're not going to school. And I just sat here thinking, I don't know how to do this. I don't have a clue. I have no knowledge to grab from. I worked in an emergency room for years and nothing there worked for this. And the next thing I heard was, you need to call all your clients and talk to them and let them know what's happening. And I said, what is happening? Exactly. What am I letting them know? How am I helping people understand that something they've counted on for years that happened every Monday or every Tuesday at a particular time wasn't happening, and I really didn't know what was going to happen. So how we experience those stressful events and how we take the information, how we process the information, how we find solutions to frequently subduing those overwhelming feelings that we don't know what to do with, or anesthetizing them, and how we go on and try to put one foot in front of the other. And everyone can look back on those days and think, what did we do? How did we work? Oddly, I can look back on them from today and say, I have now worked harder and with more people than I have ever worked with before. So I actually looked at a job that I thought was going to dwindle down to very little because I'm a play therapist. How was I going to play with 4 and 5-year-olds like this? How was I not going to be in my office with my dollhouse and my Uno game and all the other things, my Legos that I used every single day, and do this? And somehow I'm busier now than I've ever been. I have more kids that I see. I have eliminated a 4-hour commute from my life and filled it with individuals. And somehow I'm not sure what we're doing, but we are surviving. And I don't know what that's going to mean a year from now, but I know only what it means right now. So what did I do? I reacted. That was all I did. I didn't have a basis of information. I didn't have an ability to say, well, when this happens, this is what I do. I had an ability to say, okie doke. I'm going to learn how to Zoom with people. And I'm going to figure it out as we go. Also for me, in the training I've had back in the day, one of the most important words were boundaries. Setting up boundaries, keeping things correct, making sure my focus was on the information that I needed to work with and not sharing a particular amount. But now all of a sudden I'm in my own home, sharing my home. And one of the first things the kids did was say, well, can you show me around your house? Can you show me what it's like? Can you show me your bedroom? Because some of them, I was sitting in their bedroom with them. And since then, I've taken a bath with a child. Oh, very bad, very bad. 51A is probably going to be filed as we speak. But we were outside. She got filthy. Mom didn't want her muddy feet all over the house, took her in the house, said, do you mind if we go take a bath? And before I could answer, we were in the bathroom and she was in the bathtub chatting with me. So what do we do during times of crisis, chaos, and traumatic events, entering into survival mode? You might think we wing it. And there were very many parts of this that I was winging it or wung it. But there were also parts that I could go back to good, solid information and say, here's what I know and here's how I know how to do it. And so I can move forward and, at least for me, feel more comfortable than I was feeling on Friday the 13th when I went, I don't know. So interestingly, when I think about that, I think about what did my brain do? And my brain, because I worked in an emergency room, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie, went into overdrive. And I started with Amazon ordering things to have in my house to do with kids. And I'd like to tell you all that I did that so the children would be happy, but I absolutely know I did that so I would feel comfortable in my zone, in the place I knew what to do with. And I know my brain felt better doing that because then I didn't have to think about the other stuff. So, Amy, find out if people want to be bored by biology. I teach at WPI, so
I think
you want to be bored by biology?
Yeah, there lots of people are just, talking about how it resonates already for them and things are clicking and it makes sense. And yeah, and I think you're going to be able to explain biology in a way that's not too overwhelming. So thank you.
So our brain, we've got this thing called the prefrontal cortex up here, and we've got this thing back here called the hippocampus. Hippocampus is our file cabinet, or the, where you file stuff on your computer and you stick stuff in there. And just like your computer, when it goes from the prefrontal cortex of figuring out and taking on information back into that stashed area of that file cabinet, one of the most important things you have to do is know where you file the information. Just like my computer, when I had to learn, don't just hit save, and then think it goes into the mist. Figure out the file you're saving it in. So typically our prefrontal cortex organizes things out of our short-term memory and dumps it into that long-term memory in that hippocampus. And most of the time we do that in our sleep. That's when we transfer information. So I would always tell the story. At one point, I was running a family shelter for parents who were recovering from substance abuse, and the courts would give them back their children as long as they came and lived in my little place. As you can imagine, many towns were not particularly happy with the idea, and most of these programs were for 10 families living under one roof. So most towns were not particularly thrilled with the idea that my organization that I worked for was going to move 10 families of addicted parents who had court involvement and their children into their town. So part of what we had to do was figure out how we were going to do that. And we moved all the kids in. And one of the most important things that we talked about all the time was how important sleep was, because that's when you transferred all the information. And in this particular program, that was a very challenging thing for most of these parents. They would get their kids to sleep and then they would pace. And my overnight staff would call me and say, I've got 3 people up, they're not going to bed. Because they had a chemical dependence on what they had used prior to being clean and sober to sleep. And when they were in jail or wherever they were before they came to my program, those weren't places they felt particularly safe. So how we understood how they transferred information into that storage unit of their brain was very interesting and very challenging. And as many people as wanted to say, this is because of their substance use, I kind of dug my feet in and said, this is because of trauma. This is because they have now been moved from Somerville, Chelsea, Springfield, Lowell, Lawrence to beautiful downtown at the time, Plymouth, where one time when the community nurses, visiting nurses came in to help parents understand what they needed to do for kids as the weather got warmer and were describing ticks, I had 2 moms who came to me afterwards and said, we're not going outside. I don't know what these huge blood-sucking things are, but my children are not going in. And I said, you do understand they're about the size of my freckle here. These are not something, and they were like, oh. Well, how do they do that much damage? I was like, well, because we have to be careful and there's concerns, but understandably, they just went straight into that survival. We're not going outside. We will never go to the water. We will never do anything. So our brain takes on situations, information, and then we utilize that executive functioning skill and we prioritize, we file, and we take it on as a memory. I don't need to know what yesterday's specials were at the local bagel shop. I only needed to know them yesterday, but I do need to know what gasoline is going to cost me tomorrow if I want to get in my car. So we prioritize information, and our brain reacts to our ability to do that because that's how we can retrieve the information. When do we do that well? We do that really well when we're calm, controlled, and collected. The classic example is you come in, or at least I used to come in after my 2-hour drive, and honestly, what I needed to do was go to the bathroom. And if I didn't put my car keys in exactly the same place, there was a very good chance the next morning I would be searching for them because my brain hadn't really realized I stuck them in my raincoat pocket, hung it up, and the next day it wasn't raining. So post-traumatic stress disorder, I'll do a few statistics for you, affects presently 1 in 10 adults in this country. So PTSD diagnosed, which can be only diagnosed 6 months to 12 months after the trauma, affects, if you're sitting in a room with 20 people, 2 people in that room probably have that diagnosis. The anecdotal evidence says to us there are probably 5 more that haven't been diagnosed because they're not seeking treatment. So when we push that down to children, we've got 1 in 15 children So we got 1 in 15 kids that have PTSD, and presently the autism spectrum diagnosis is 2 out of 24, so 1 out of 12. Yeah, that is pretty shocking because it used to be 1 in 3,000, but we've widened that spectrum for lots of very good reasons. So when you're looking at what's going on with families and kids, we have to understand that the basic action of trauma changes everything. The thinking brain begins to dim, literally when we look at the scans, similar to a light switch dimming, and our ability to pay attention, to discern information, and to then reprocess it into useful information is diminished significantly. It would kind of be as if I were here, but most of me was in shadows speaking to you, and I was talking at this tone of voice. So how we understand it. We lose the ability to use our skills, our thinking skills, in any effective ways. Our survival brain tends to be impulsive. It tends to be focused on self-preservation. It tells us that using executive functioning skills takes too much time to process, and the information cannot be guaranteed, and we need to just move forward. This is that bull in the china shop kind of thing. For those of you who work with kids, these are the kids that come in and are often described as not having a really good consciousness of where their bodies is in a room. They knock into things, they knock things over, they appear clumsy. And what they really are is on survival mode. They've been told to go into the room and they're having to do that. The great thing about survival mode is that's what keeps us alive. So how do you know when you're in survival brain, especially during prolonged situations of communal trauma, like a global pandemic, or after a tragic death or civil unrest in a particular country? How do we understand where we are? Well, it's easy with adults. We have an ability to evaluate post these situations what we were like. First thing we have is a lack of focus. I choose to talk about this for the number of people that I see posting on Facebook about being overwhelmed by watching the news all the time and feeling like they have no escape because their focus becomes a monotonous look at CNN all day long, where it says breaking news maybe 15 times in 4 hours, and it's always the same piece. But the word breaking news makes our brain go, I've got to watch this. This is important. This might have something to do with me. I think yesterday was probably a day that lots of people struggled with using the ability to watch and not watch something, which was the marathon. I still talk to people. My own daughter was at the marathon 9 years ago and remembers running from, she lived in Medford at the time. She was on the opposite side of the street. And because of the explosion, she couldn't have gone across the street to go home. So she turned around and ran all the way to Jamaica Plain to one of her friends' houses. And over the weekend, she brought that all up again because that was just such a traumatic time for her. So we lose focus. We alter our memory. One of the best ways to know this happens is to talk to anybody after they've observed an accident. And you will typically get a very different story from everyone. It was a blue car, it was a green car, it was a minivan, it was a red truck. The person was tall, short, or whatever in between. And I learned a lot about the tall, short thing one year when I actually physically had to go into my bank to do some business. And I knew the people in the bank well, but I always went through drive up or went to the ATM. And I looked around the door frame and there was a red push pin on the door frame. And I said, oh, you guys forget to take down this thumbtack after they had taken down their holiday decorations. And everybody behind the desk said, don't touch that. I thought, well, they have a very odd attachment to a red thumbtack until they told me that's exactly 6 feet. And I said, okay. And they said, because we've been trained, if anything happens in this bank, we've been robbed or something's been violated, as the person is running out the door, we need to watch that pin and know, are they taller than that or shorter than that? So when people come to take information, we can say taller than 6 feet or shorter than 6 feet. And they had all been trained to do that, so they would know how to do that. We also become tired. We are more tired. At the beginning of this global pandemic, that was the major complaint I heard from friends. Oh, I'm exhausted. I'm sleeping so much more. I can't get up. Thank goodness I don't have to go to work. We are much more tired because we are working much harder to keep ourselves together. And we are emotionally reactive. You find yourself being more upset about things that you wouldn't normally react to. If you look back, I don't do a lot of social media stuff. I'm not really computer that savvy. But I call myself a voyeur on Facebook because that's how I find out what's going on with people I went to high school with. And one of the things I noticed was that people became much more aggressive in the kinds of comments they made on Facebook. If someone asked people to do something down here, people were asked to clean up the beaches. People were asked to not throw their trash out. We don't have any place for trash. People are asked to recycle. And people would snap back with very aggressive remarks about this whole thing. And you just knew there was no more filter going on, and we became a very emotionally reactive people. You might have found yourself snippier, grumpier, feeling more like making a joke about everything. We tend to forget to care about basic needs. I think this was really interesting in the beginning of the pandemic, where people were buying cases of toilet paper, and that was the most important thing they could do. A woman I knew, a mom of one of my kids, one day said to me, I set my alarm for midnight so I can get up and get a delivery time from Instacart to bring me toilet paper and paper towels. And the first thing I thought about was she had twins, both of whom were in diapers. I don't know how much toilet paper everyone was using, but there are still people who have stashes of toilet paper in their homes because that was the thing that they did, and they didn't really look at the other kinds of basic needs. People were talking about not getting dressed, living in sweatpants. People who didn't even get up and brush their teeth because I don't have anywhere to go. Why do I bother? I don't need to do that. People were more impulsive. This same daughter that I was telling you about that works in the marathon, she works in the alcohol industry. They have had the best 2 years of their lives. Alcohol consumption is astronomically up. People tended to spend excessively. It was very easy. You clicked on Amazon, you could buy anything you wanted. You clicked, on all those things, and people looked back and just found that they were being more excessive. They were eating more. We've heard about the amount of weight people have put on during the pandemic. This morning, I was actually listening to a pediatrician who was discussing that children's height has been diminished and their weight has increased. And they're looking at the lack of hitting developmental milestones because kids have not been outside and playing and running around, and they were pleading with parents to please get your kids outside during this vacation. There is one thing to say about screen time, and it took a lot of heat during this, but the reality is it was probably the sedentary. And look, I'm doing play therapy with a kid sitting in front of a screen with me. So specifically for children, if you want to know a little bit about that, their survival brain can look very different than an adult survival brain. So if you want to figure out if kids you know or are working with are reacting to survival brain kinds of impacts, children show an increased emotional expression. They show increased emotional dysregulation. They cry more often. They can be more aggressive. They can yell more often. They can appear depressed. They can appear disinterested. They can appear more reflective of impact from things around them, more distracted. There are a couple of kids that I work with that I see in the middle of chaos in the house, and I spend most of my time watching them go like this. Even though they've found the game we're playing, and honestly, I don't care when kids cheat at playing. So they deal my cards, then they look at my cards and play my cards for me. It's really quite humorous. And then they announce they won. And I say, this is great. I really enjoyed playing with you. Glad you won. Some children became increasingly more isolated. I hear a lot of conversations now where they'd like us to add addiction to screens, social media, addiction to all those things as one of the addictions in the diagnosis. They're not there yet. We're still trying to get them to add trauma reactive kids to the diagnosis. But if you can imagine a parent who was trying to work from home, their best day was finding a video game that that child liked to play. Or I have a 2.5-year-old grandchild. My daughter and her husband were both working from home, and what she found that occupied him was river dance. And he now can do most of the 2.5-year-old's version of river dance, which includes his hands on his hips and making entrances into the room. And when Michael Flatley kneels down to point to the group, he does the same thing. At least he was physically active. Children may stop doing things that bring them joy or they find difficult. So they're going to avoid taking on new tasks, because if we go back to that trauma brain versus learning brain, they don't have any room to figure out that new task. And they're going to sometimes avoid having conversations with others. I have a lot of parents who are trying to figure out how to talk with their kids anymore because the kids come in from school. And I actually see a number of my after-school kids. I start in the car when they are picked up from school or on the bus coming home from school. And so I go with them when they get out of the car. Now, the whole ride home, they've talked to me, not mom or grandma or whoever's got them. We go in, they get a snack, they gather their snack, they go up to their bedroom, and I see them typically for 50 minutes to an hour. Nobody's looked to talk to them after school but me. They have trouble trusting others. It is a very hard world when it's been turned upside down and everybody expects you to still trust. So when kids don't trust others, adults describe their behavior as lying, stealing, or keeping secrets. Kids might be more jumpy, more on edge, have difficulty sleeping, have difficulty sustaining sleep. So they might go to sleep, they might wake up 3 or 4 times a night. They might go to sleep and not go to bed and not fall asleep. I had kids reporting to me, older kids. I was like, well, what time do you go to bed at night? Well, I go to bed at 9 o'clock. I don't go to sleep until 1:30. Why don't you go to sleep until 1:30? Well, they're on their tablets, they're on their phones, they're listening to things, they're finding out things. And as angry as parents got about those circumstances, I looked at it as they're still thirsting for something. We just have to replace what they're thirsting for. Kids zone out. Zoning out can look like a lack of focus or look like they're not hearing you when you call their name or seem as though they're in a different world. And actually, this is part of that survival mode brain taking over. This is very much part of that kid listening for what they think they need to hear, and their name may not be what they need to hear. As recently as yesterday, I've been seeing a kid. I've never seen this kid, so we breathe the physical airspace. He will be 5 in a couple of weeks. He was diagnosed and treated for leukemia. I am not. Insurance companies make it very difficult for us to see kids under the age of 2. So we typically wait until they're 2 years old. If I see them under the age of 2, I have to ask the insurance company every 4 sessions to allow me to continue to see the kid. Mostly because insurance companies don't think we can make an impact on kids under the age of 2. So I picked this kid up when he finished his treatment for leukemia. And recently, and his mother was obviously very concerned when school went back into session in person. She's a teacher. He's still fragile. He's not vaccinated. So she decided to take a sabbatical from her job, and she decided to work from home at another job and homeschool him. So she's also pregnant again, due with her 3rd child in about 6 weeks. And she has another child who is 18 months old. She decided yesterday that it was a beautiful day and they'd go outside and play. Everybody goes outside and play, and the 18-month-old fills his pants and needs them changed. The older child doesn't want to go in. He's having a grand time outside. She decides to take the risk, leaves him outside, runs inside, changes the younger one's diapers, comes back out, can't find the older child, and is standing in the backyard yelling his name, yelling his name, yelling his name. He's not answering. She gets more and more anxious, more and more confused. And let me remind you, this is a mom who is only on the edge of getting a clean bill of health for her child that could have died of leukemia. So we're not far, we're not even out of the trauma, which I reminded her because she doesn't know how much time passed before she called 911. Called 911, the first 2 police cars showed up. They came, they searched the yard, they yelled his name, they did everything. 2 more police cars showed up. They sat down, they investigated with her, as they always do. They searched the house, they did all kinds of things. I have no idea how long this took, but it was this far, she said, from the last cop to arrive, holding up his phone to call in the Amber Alert. While they're sitting on the steps of their deck, and he says, "Do you hear knocking?" "I hear knocking." And they looked under the deck, and he'd been hiding there the whole time. Thought he had done the most wonderful job at playing hide and go seek. But when I talked to him, after Mom told me the whole story of how it had happened, I said, "Sounds like Mom got really worried about you." And he smiled, and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "I know, it's really funny." And I thought, oh, I hope Mom didn't hear that, she'll kill him. But he didn't understand. He still lives in a brain where he doesn't understand why the whole world puts him in a bubble. And all he did was hide. Who at 4+ years old hasn't played hide and seek? So they can zone out, they can look, and I think he was under the deck for quite some time. So if you're listening to me and you see yourself having experienced some of these things, having had these kinds of feelings, I mean, this is a remarkable opportunity to do a training like this as we are hopefully coming one day closer to the end of a pandemic, moving to an endemic, moving to, a yearly flu shot. Have you seen in yourself, are you in survival brain? Is it very different from your normal brain? Is it that you didn't understand because maybe you were very lucky and nobody in your family was affected by COVID? Maybe you got COVID and it was no worse than a bad flu and you got through it. Maybe all kinds of things. So you're like, look, I'm just sick and tired of wearing a mask. I want to be able to go to restaurants. I want to be able to travel. I want to be able to, as I keep hearing people say, go back to normal. How do you feel this has all impacted? Have you had changes in routine? I have huge changes in my routine. I now don't start my day at 8 o'clock in the morning. I start my day at 7. I see my first kid at 7. I have 4 breakfasts with kids before they go to school. Was there a disruption of school? Well, I know I'm just about to go back to WPI and face-to-face learning, but I have been back in my lecture hall with my podium for 2.5 years, which was very interesting because WPI never did online classes. And I had taught at another college and done online classes. So when this all started, the dean called me and she goes, "We're having a meeting, you need to come. We got to find out how you do this thing." I said, oh God, these people are so much smarter than me and they don't know how to do this. This is hysterical. Did you find you were disconnected from friends or family? I know that there were months and months and months that I didn't see my grandchild my second grandchild was born during COVID. Did you lose loved ones? Did you feel the emotional charge of the civil unrest that was going on, the world fighting with each other, hoarding toilet paper? Did you experience racism? Because in my opinion, we did experience racism during this whole experience of this issue. I know that there were communities that did not have the ability to access the same kinds of services I had the ability to access. There were communities that didn't have the ability to stay home the way I had the ability to stay home. There were people that were in far more danger than I was in at all. Did you experience bullying? Were there people telling you? I find just going on Facebook, I could feel the bullying from the people who were not of the opinion that any of this was legitimate or real or needed to be done. Did you have the issue of financial unknown? How am I going to make a living? How am I going to pay my bills? What the heck are we going to do about taxes? Which, you know, most people relish the appreciation of not having to pay them until later. But so what did we do while we lived in this survival mode? How did we survive? Life can be busy and chaotic on any given day, but add to it any kind of trauma. I always think about the kinds of things that I learned from working in a jail, from working with first responders, training firefighters and police officers and deputies on how to deal with people with significant psychiatric issues. And how long did we think we could live in survival mode? I consider myself still living in survival mode, despite the fact that I know that now it's become just the norm. So there are things about survival mode that I've adjusted, and there are things about survival mode that are still very much ingrained in me. I now no longer just have a bottle of water in the car, which is what I always had in the car, whether it was the middle of winter and it froze or the middle of summer and I could put, you know, tea bags in it and it became iced tea. I also know that I now keep 3 or 4 masks in the car. 3 or 4, you say? Why would you keep 3 or 4? Well, there's one for me and there's one for anybody else I see that might not have one. Oh, do you need a mask? I've got one. I know that I go through the motions of life in a very different way because I think twice about the things I'm going to do and the order in which I'm going to do them, how I'm going to manage them, how I can complete tasks. I grew up with a mother who said it's better to get it done and not have to think about it than to put it off and do it later. She and I worked very differently. There were things that I had and I lived with, this is the house I grew up in. So my mother in her elder years and my dad in their elder years lived here with me. I lived here with them in their house that I live in. So my mother was not one to put something on the counter and not know where it went. I was very much someone to put something on the counter and wait till it told me where it should live. At least that's what I told her. I don't do that anymore. I put it away. What are the consequences of going through survival mode? Well, the consequences we know are you have a raised blood pressure, your eating habits have either increased or decreased, your consciousness of healthy activities may have been altered. You may have become a person who is, this is good enough. One of my favorite things to do is to watch America's Test Kitchen or Milk Street TV on PBS so I can learn about cooking because I'm not good at it. And the biggest thing I've learned in the pandemic is I don't have prunes. Oh, I've got figs. I'll use those. I don't have this. I can use this. And then I subject, anyone who's eating with me, what do you think? I adopted meatless Mondays and then it became into meatless weeks just because it was fun to do. Occupied my brain, gave me something to think about. But I also know that I was faced with the stressors that I hadn't anticipated and didn't have any planful time to address. Because as I said to you, Friday the 13th, it all closed down. I was back seeing kids by the following Wednesday. And I had no idea how that worked. 2 weeks later, I was back teaching online classes to my kids at WPI. And I didn't anticipate the fact that the time difference would be very important. So when they said, do you want to teach synchronous or asynchronous? I thought, thank God I know what those words mean. And I said, yeah, I don't care. I'll teach asynchronous. They can tune in anytime they want. But I had kids who had gone home to parts all over the world, and I hadn't anticipated time zones may be more different than I thought between here and California. So there were some kids who were waking up to take my class, and for them it was 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. Why is it so dark where you are? It's 3 a.m. So what does that do to us? We're going back to biology for a minute. What does stress do? It causes significant chemical changes in our body, hormonal changes. We produce a lot more cortisol, digestive changes, our bathroom habits change, all of it. And that changes how our body physiologically responds to things. So what you responded to being hungry, thirsty, tired may be totally different right now, and what other people respond that way. Why is that important? Because as we're in survival, those 3 F's, that fight, freeze, or flight, also gets altered in how we process that information and what we do about it. So let's just imagine during this lovely circumstance, you decided to take a hike through the woods and you hear rustling in the brush. It appears to be coming towards you. I write about this because I started doing a lot more walking. I had a lot more time. I wasn't in my car as much. And I live on the Audubon marshlands. I am used to wildlife roaming around. Typically, I'm bigger than all of the wildlife. And I'm only really very phobic of snakes. But I do remember when I would take these walks, because there was no other noise. Nobody was really on the road. And when it's really quiet, I can hear some of the roads nearby. I live in the middle of nowhere. All of my neighbors are snowbirds, so they're, gone in March. And I realized I was looking around a lot more, not just saying, I wonder what that is, but saying, I wonder what that is. I've lived here since I was 4 years old. I had never been so conscious of what animals might be around me as I was. What did that do? It created an adrenaline rush in me. Now, adrenaline's a wonderful drug, except that it's highly addictive. You get to a point where you're dealing with adrenaline all the time and you feel like, boy, this is making me sharper. I'm doing a much better job on the adrenaline. I'm making decisions. I'm really getting it done. Or as my children tell me, I'm nailing it. I'm not a big fan of that phrase. So the adrenaline's flowing, the cortisol's going, I got hormones churning through my body, and my thoughts go fight, flight, or freeze. And I pick up the pace walking. Well, I'm going home and I'm changing my time of walking. I'm not walking early in the morning. I know what's out. All those mother foxes are out hunting for food for their cubs, like I might be their food. They're not big enough to take me down. But I think about that. I know there's no bear, although once we had a bear on the Cape. I can't figure out how it got here. I think it was on one of the garbage scows, but I don't know why nobody wrote a book about it for kids. I mean, Mr. Bear went to Boston. I don't know why they didn't say then he went to the Cape for vacation. Because they finally, moved the bear. It was a huge event. Moved the bear back onto the mainland, took him to set him free. The poor animal came all the way for vacation and he got abducted. Are there really dangerous animals around here? No. But I changed my course. At times, our bodies may overreact to stressors that we experience. We may sweat, we may get flushed, we may stammer. One of the things we do is our pupils dilate. That's intentional so that we can focus better. We don't have to look all around ourselves. We can focus better on what we need to be prepared for, but that also means we miss what's all around us. That's part of the reason those people who report what they saw in accidents or traumatic events are oftentimes not quite clear because their pupils have dilated and they become very focused. Chances are the only thing I heard was a rabbit, but what's going to happen to that next? What if I get so concerned about that that I alter the approach I'm taking to life and I choose to only go out for walks in the middle of the day, which could be lovely. But for me, going out for a walk in the middle of the day in July means I'm going to come back to my after school or my kids sweating, which probably doesn't make me really comfortable to do my afternoon. So, well, I guess I'm just not going to walk anymore. So I've changed something that is healthy and appropriate and good to do, and I've changed it simply because of what I think might be going on. Any questions before I move forward? Because we're 1 hour in. We're good?
Yeah, people haven't had questions. Just resonates when we hear all these things. And I so appreciate that you use yourself as an example of like, here's how I do it. So it gives us the space to kind of apply it to our own lives and selves. I don't know if anybody has any questions. Now's a good time to.
Or if anybody has Amy, if somebody has something they really wanted me to cover, I usually ask that at the beginning.
Oh yeah.
But I don't ask that as much now. I like to do it in the midstream because in the beginning, nobody raises their hand.
Right.
And when I lecture at WPI, the beginning of every lecture, anything 5 or 10 minutes in, but I can't really see all you guys raising your hands. So if there are questions.
Oh, Wairemu has a raised hand. Go ahead, Wairemu. You can just jump right in.
Hi, everyone. This is quite profound. And if I must say, what has stuck on my mind is survival is not learning. And that kind of opened it all up for me, whether it's from personal experiences, from people, close families, friends that I've had to, walk through. So what I want to raise is the fact that I also came to realize that there are people who had, for lack of a better word, been living in a pandemic anyway prior to the pandemic. So they kind of saw like the world has now joined me in what I have been going through anyway. So it's like they've become, they had already gone through that life, whether it's losing loved ones, maybe you had just lost some family members, for a couple of years. And then now the pandemic comes, you're already living in trauma. And then now when the pandemic comes, you're just numb. You're thinking, okay, so you guys now get to know what, trauma is. I've been there, done that. So it was very hard to even, connect with such people or even to be on the same page with such, with such a person. And then the other thing is, I'll use my example, like a brief example. I had just moved here with my 3 children, end of 2019. That's December 2019. So here I am. As a parent, you're supposed to be the ninja, the go-to person, but I could not be that even before the pandemic to my kids because we are learning a new system together, the school system, everything together. 3 months down the line, school shut down. Then you're thrown into remote learning. I have 3, 9, 7, and 5. And then a lot was going on. I'm still trying to learn things around here. And then the pandemic. And then shortly after that, now for me too, the pandemic came, but I was already going through a crisis of my own. And then also there's grief. You lose someone, not necessarily out of COVID, totally different circumstances. So you get out of touch. And there was this need within me to be put apart, to be set apart. Like there is the pandemic, but I have 3 extra pandemics to me. Like, can you see that? So when everyone else is going through, even if you're going through a system, there's that need for someone to feel maybe that you are also like you need to be set apart because there's more needs to you. But at the same time, it's very unfair because even for someone who doesn't have anything going else, life had been disrupted for everyone. So it was very hard to get level ground. I mean, I think for everyone in those 2 years, words like fairness, just, any normalcy of any sort just did not exist. So, I mean, I just want to appreciate this platform because I'm also able on a personal level to put things in buckets and be able to kind of put everything in its place. But again, it's also going to take a bit of a while to reconcile all these buckets and get back to, to at least having like, I don't even like to use the term normal anymore because it's relative. My pace is not someone else's pace. So thank you.
I think you raised really important points. I'm going to start backwards. I think to me, it's the same way I've looked at children when people have said normal versus abnormal. And I like to reframe it as typical versus challenged and not think about, so absolutely. I think one of the most profound things that I heard from the medical community was the ability people had to describe losses in their lives as not from COVID. My mother died, not from COVID. My dog died. My dog died in the beginning of COVID, not from COVID. I don't even think dogs could get COVID, but people were like, oh, did it have COVID? I was like, no, the dog was 16 years old. It was just a tragic loss for me all by myself in my house. And also, you're absolutely right. One of the things that when I talked about my little friend who was hiding under the deck, it was all about the fact that she was re-triggered with losing her child. She talked to me about pleading with God not to have let her child either fall somewhere and be dead or be abducted, whatever it was. And she went from 0 to 120 in a second because that trauma has not ended for her yet. And she's not in that recovery place. And we're not going to go back to normal. Normal no longer exists. We're going to go on to something new. We're going to look at our lives differently. We're going to figure out the way we do things differently. I think everything I've heard from school kids is we had a situation down here where a school had a flood and they had to close down that day about a month ago. And so all the kids that I was talking to were like, yeah, no school today, that went to that particular school. And I was like, wow. I said, you do remote learning again? They were like, Miss Abby, what are you talking about? No, we had a no school day. We have to make it up in June. And I said, oh no, I thought when this whole thing started and we could do remote learning, we'd never have snow days again, that these kids wouldn't have to be going to school in June, cleaning the classroom one more day to make that number. But, we went back to, nope, it was just, they didn't do remote learning. They just went on. So we keep defining the new. And when you had to jump into the new, like, I can't imagine arriving for me anywhere and then having everything change. And I thought I had figured out this much of it. And now I just went back 20 paces. It's like, those games you have to play where you go, oh, nope, red light, go back 10, you blew it, and start again, figuring out, how do I do this? How do I go to the store? How do I get the things I need? How do I help my children learn? How do I take care of all these people? It's an amazing, overwhelming amount of information to process in the middle of, I don't know what to do. To me, it's kind of like I go to a restaurant. I don't eat sushi. Very strange. I live in a seafood community. I grew up here. Sushi was bait for all of the people I knew in the fishing community. So, I'll eat the shrimp ones that are cooked, but none of that raw stuff. And all of a sudden, here I am in a sushi restaurant looking at the menu, and they come over and they're like, what would you like? And I think I haven't even gotten through 4 things. I have to read every ingredient to know. And I usually turn to them and go, do you have chowder? Oh, yes. I'm like, good, I'll have a cup of chowder. And I call it a day. It's like, it's too much. I can't get it all into my head and discern it and figure it out and negotiate the whole thing. So yeah, I can't even imagine how overwhelmingly exhausting that must have been. And here you are, still here to talk about it. Not that I need to drum up business in my profession, but like the whole world should be talking to somebody about this stuff because it impacts us, it changes us. And it's hard to get our heads wrapped around that.
I mean, that kind of leads to one of it wasn't exactly framed as I'm framing it, but I know we base health on norms, right? And you had mentioned kind of challenge versus, when the norm is so different, like, can we assume we all are going to have trauma? Like, and of course, people were asking, so what do you think this is going to mean for all of us that have been living through at least this one trauma, in many cases, multiple?
So I'll start again from the back and go forward. It's a really good thing I love my job, because if I didn't love my job as much, I'd tell you, well, I do know the secret, and for $59.95, send me an email and I'll send you what you need to do to get through this. But in all honesty, we know what we've done to get through other things, and we take that information and we kind of try to spread it out, thinly veiled over what we're doing. And then there are some really brilliant people who do research far better than I do, who are out there just watching. That's all they're doing. They're not invested in it like I am. They're just watching. And if it doesn't work, they go, oh, that's out. And if something works, they go, oh, good, let's keep that. And at some point in time, you are all part of this experiment, and they're watching all of you. I think the important thing about norms, any of you working with human beings, I work with children a lot. I know kids walk somewhere between 8 and 16 months. I know if they're walking at 8 months, God help the adults who live with them. And if they're not walking by the time they're 15 months, there are a bunch of other people that start getting involved. But I listen all the time to moms of year-old kids who say they're not walking yet. And I think, aren't you lucky? You know? But they're truly panicked. And I just recently had a mom who tongue tie is a new rage in the population. There's probably, because we know it genetically runs in families, there are probably a number of people in my generation and your generations that were tongue-tied and nobody dealt with it. Now they look for it and they deal with it. And then there are people that make decisions about whether they need to surgically fix it or they don't need to fix it. And if you talk to speech therapists, they'll tell you all about it. And I do a lot of that in IEPs. And so I have a kid that they're describing as a late talker. Mom has gone through, he's autistic, which is how I got him, because I have an expertise in autism, and he's not autistic, not even close, not even on the outside of the realms of the possibles of those which I let keep the diagnosis because they get services. It doesn't matter to me. I just keep reminding people, please don't do behavior mod. It's not going to work with this kid because they're not really autistic, but let's just keep going down the road. So what do we want to think about norms? Are norms used to define us as how we can be included, or are norms used to define as how we are excluded? I think that's the thing that I struggle with about norms. The child that redefines themselves by saying, I'm not inside the group because I have ADD, ASD. I've got a kid who's a junior in high school. I got him in 5th grade. And he constantly would say to me, well, I can't do that. I have autism. He doesn't. What he did have was a profoundly autistic, nonverbal older sister who was his role model when he was born. So his initial activities in life were very much similar to kids who are on the spectrum, very similar. He isn't. And by now, with the junior in high school, when he starts to defend one of his actions, he says, what? He goes, never mind, I already know what you're going to say. Because I say to him, tell me about your sister. What's she doing lately? And tell me how you do the same thing. So I think norms are a word we use to define people when we really should define people by getting to know them. Norms are things we use to exclude people. I don't think anybody should be excluded unless they choose not to join. And norms are things we use to say, this is great, and this is what you should aspire to, when I think that people should aspire to what they think is great, because I need all kinds of people in my life. I need people who are great at fixing my plumbing, and people who are brilliant at doing the research, and people who make me laugh and create great music and great artwork. And I just don't think we can just define that by the word norm. I think it's a very scary weapon that we use And sometimes we use it to self-flagellate ourselves. Well, I'm not normal. And so I guess that what we come out of this with, I would hope, would be great professionals who understand. I mean, I work with kids. I want great professionals who understand, okay, this is really hard for someone right now. I don't know if it's going to be hard for them next week. I don't know if it's going to be hard for them 10 years from now. But right now it's hard for them, and I know how to help with that. And it's only hard for them because they're struggling with it, not because I say, you really should be able to do that. So I guess that's where I stand on this.
Love it. Beautiful. I think that's covers most of the things people put in the chat. But of course, if anybody else wants to ask, or, well, we're at a sort of natural stopping point before Abby picks back on up.
Yeah, I'm old and I'm Irish and I can do this all day long. So
it's
hang on.
Amazing.
And it's public school vacation week. So I got a lot of kids who aren't coming in. They're on vacation. I got a lot of kids, though, who are taking me on vacation. That's the hard part now, where I'm not in the office. So when I said to kids, so next week's vacation, what do you want to do about Thursday at 2? Well, what do you mean? Well, I mean, you're going to be on vacation. I know, but I'll have my phone. We can still talk. Why wouldn't we talk? I'm like, we'll talk. I'm good. All good.
I love that you started that about boundaries in the very beginning too, right? How different they are now. Now you're on vacation with people.
If my professors from graduate school at Boston College knew what I'm doing right now, I would have failed all my courses. Kids have my home address because they send me mail. They send me pictures. They send me things that they've drawn. They say, if I ask them a question, next week we're going to do this. Let's remember we're going to talk about that. Midweek I get a thing. I was thinking about this. Here's what I think, and I want to talk about this. So, I answer the phone. I get text from kids now. I never got text from kids. I get text from their parents. They send me, what do you think about this? A kid wants to dye their hair green. What do you think about this color? And I'm looking at it on my phone. It looks gray. I'm like, it's gray. Why do you want to dye your hair gray? It's green, Miss Abby. All right, it looks gray to me, so I obviously am not getting a good perspective. What do you want to dye your hair green for? Because I think it's cool. What do you think everyone else will say? I don't know. Let's talk about that more. All right, so I think one of the things that this leads to is, I can only imagine if I had someone that as a child. Oh, Heather, finish what you're telling me.
Hi. So, no, I just had some real early on childhood trauma. I was 2, and so moving on through that point, I just remembered an incident when I was like 3rd or 4th grade, and I actually told about my trauma in my classroom, and the teachers and the adults involved like squashed it right away, and I got that label of lying, exaggerating, causing drama. And they call my stepmother into the office, and they don't bring me into the office with her. It's her and the principal in a separate room while I'm sitting in the main office discussing about the fact that this was actually a real story, and it was never acknowledged about that. And so it's just sort of like that whole, like, the total denial, and just hearing you talk about like these kids being able to talk to you, and if one person had just said, I believe you, it's okay, like those little things, like how different would that be, because my mom was she was in a car accident and hit by a drunk driver, and she was in a coma, and then she was in a nursing home. And so and for a little kid, that's like this big story. And quite frankly, it was my whole identity, because there was custody battles and all kinds of issues regarding, the fallout of that. And then for my family and the professionals and the adults to just be like, why would you talk about that? It's really
important.
So yeah,
that's why we're doing this series, right? I think there's a really big push. People are so uncomfortable with trauma that they do shut you down. They do, let's pretend that's not happening. Let's not talk about it. That's not at all the right thing to do. But people don't, I think we all come from our own pain. Whenever we see trauma, we respond in not the healthiest ways. And I am really sorry and sad that went down like that for you. And I wish I was surprised too, but it's absolutely heartbreaking that, Abby, you said it when you're talking about, ask the kid what's if you knew the story about the kid on the autism spectrum whose older sister, wow, that's a whole, so often we don't even get to the bottom of it. That's like trauma informed 101, try to figure out what's going on. But we just routinely do not do that unless you're a therapist. And even so, oh, John, stop whining is what I was told.
Oh, I was just going to discuss that we spend a lot of time and throughout this pandemic, for families who lost loved ones, they struggled so much with not breaking down in front of their children, not crying in front of their children. And I always tell parents, please do cry. That's another opportunity for learning, that it's okay to cry. But, and especially, John, for what we do to men in this community, where we talk about big boys don't cry. And, men are supposed to do many other things to be socially acceptable. Crying is not amongst them. So much so that if you cry when something is going on, people get dysregulated and concerned and want to, for their own needs, appear to make you feel better, which is really just to eliminate exposing themselves to the profound sadness. Many, gosh, it was probably just after I got out of graduate school, which will now date how really old I am. We were working on putting categories on records, which now dates how old I am, which was music, and on movies and things. And if you look at how we determine what children can watch, we don't allow children to watch things that are profoundly involved with love. We certainly don't want them to discuss sex. We don't want them to have anything, but we do allow them to watch things that are profoundly violent, that have profound death, that is oftentimes abusive, and other people are taken advantage of, hurt, and cry, and are in really bad situations, but that's okay. And right now I spend a lot of time, if you talk to any of the kids that I treat and you said to them, what does Abby know about video games? They'd go, nothing. She knows nothing about video games. Because whenever they are in trouble, what happens is they lose their privilege to play video games, which for a lot of kids right now is their social connections. They've developed these social connections, and I talk to kids a lot about what time we see each other. 4 o'clock is the worst time for my middle school kids, because they've gotten home from school and they've gotten invested in whatever the game, their Minecrafts, Roadblocks, whatever they're playing, and they don't want to stop at 4 o'clock and see me. So for a lot of them, they get on and they leave the video game in the side. And, as if I can't tell, and I'll chat with them, and they'll be very polite and chat with me and know how to answer all the questions. And then I'll say, what are you doing? And they get this horrified look at me, and I say, no, I'm serious. What are you doing? I'm just interested. What are you doing? And they're like, I'm playing Minecraft. And I'm like, and how are you doing? Well, I'm doing pretty good. Well, that's great. Are you playing with friends from school, or are you playing with the friends that you made during, earlier on? Oh, well, it's this group. And I can literally watch their postures come back up, and I say, okay, so I don't know anything about these games. Explain to me the point. Like, why do you like this? Why do you want to play it? What does it do for you? How does it make you feel? Like, I'm watching your face and you're really serious. You must be working really hard. all of those not negative things to say to kids about when they're taking on a task. And then I can lead that to, so tell me, this is what you're like when you're doing your homework, right? I mean, you're really focused. You're really, sometimes, like, wow, your brain must be amazing. Sometimes I get so distracted. I'm trying to do two things at once. It's just a different way to look at it. But yeah, I mean, the cry in front of your kids, explain to them. The kids all think it's bizarre that I watch children's shows. When they say to me, "Do you watch Encanto?" "Oh yeah." "Who's your favorite character? What's your favorite song?" They're like, "You watch that movie?" I'm like, "I watched Sesame Street." The other day I watched Winnie the Pooh. I cry at the end of Winnie the Pooh every time. They're like, "Why do you cry?" I said, "Because Christopher Robin grows up and he doesn't play with them anymore." And oh, I think that's so sad. I mean, I have a Winnie the Pooh. Oh, you spelled my name correctly. So yeah, I
You
don't
saw
think
a hand
norms.
raised too, right? Ruth has her hands up, and then you've got question in the chat.
All right, Ruth, bring it on. What's up?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for this important event. I may be sharing with you something that might be something that we in the Latino community must have a conversation. And I just want to share with you because I had the conversation with Congressman McGovern, and we had agreed to have a forum to discuss. The U.S. Census Bureau report found that the 10 worst states for Latinos to live in, guess which is the worst? Massachusetts. We have the highest Latino youth incarceration,
Yes.
the highest Latino youth school dropout, and I call it push out. And so I would love, to sit down with you because you got so much knowledge about, what we've been talking about. How can we work with our community? Because we see with the pandemic, the Latino community in Worcester was the worst affected. The whole, it's unbelievable the things that are going on. We spent a whole year. I asked the mayor for a meeting to discuss the disparity. Latino students are suspended 85% higher than white students for doing similar infraction. And after a year, we got no result. And the superintendent never wanted to meet with us. And I was heartbroken when I saw in the Worcester magazine, one of the superintendent's friend telling her, trying to comfort her by saying to her, "Don't worry about those children because they come from families that are spiritually poor." So my people keep saying, "Ruth, stop fighting the system," because if that's what they believe, that explains why they treat our children the way they do. So I would love, to sit down with you and maybe we can, you can help me find out a way how I can, continue to help my community because it's really painful to see. And the racism has escalated. I mean, ever since we had that president who doesn't like, us, who's very racist, it seems to awaken a lot of the, what I call closet racists, and now they can show their racism openly and nobody, questions it. So thank you.
Thank you. It is a tragic situation when the community doesn't understand that we all get stronger when we all get stronger, that we don't get stronger by keeping other people weak or disenfranchised or not considered as important members of the community. I struggle in my profession because we don't have nearly nearly enough ability to have enough bilingual therapists so that families are comfortable in their own language explaining what's going on. And the number of children that I have been involved with who I have to find a translator so that I can work with their family members is just not the best way to do this work. It is not, I mean, thankfully I have a great translator that is in the business and does this for me, but it is, access should be access, not restrictions and exclusivity. And that's tragic. And I am so sorry. So sorry.
Thank you.
The infant death rate in your community is much higher than in other communities.
2019, they decided experiencing racism would give you an ACE point. That's like a couple years ago. So there's finally acknowledgement of the long-term pervasive harm that racism is doing to children.
Yeah, where I live on the Cape, I'm old, I grew up down here. There was an enormous Portuguese population. And Ruth, I know mostly swears in Portuguese from my friends' parents who yelled out the door at us, and I knew we're really in trouble. That's a bad word. But other than that, you know, there was, but I never really understood until I went on to the mainland and saw what excluding people was involved. I was very fortunate, and I don't understand that they were there was a community that we lived in, and that's where we lived. That's how we existed. But it is overwhelming what fear can generate.
I can share with you just one last thing, how this immigration policy in this country is so racist. While I was doing my master at BU, part of the program, we worked with the community on Fridays. And it was a year that Boston passed a law that families enrolling their children in the Boston Public School had to show proof of citizenship. I took a family from Puerto Rico, because they didn't speak English, and I accompanied them to enroll their children. In front of us, there were tons of white families enrolling their children. And we knew some of them because, let me tell you, before this whole thing, you know, like immigrants coming from Black and brown countries are always called illegal. But those white immigrants that come from Europe, they're undocumented. They're not illegal. But what happened that day is, we're in line waiting our turn, and none of the white families were asked. When it came our turn, she was very adamant, demanding that we show proof of citizenship. And I wasn't even political then, let me tell you, but I thought something was wrong. And I said to her, also, you didn't ask any of those white families, but you asked this family that comes from Puerto Rico, who are citizens even before they left the island. This is what's going on today with immigration. I mean, you look at former Trump, his wife, two of his wives came here undocumented and got their citizenship when they married him. But our community that comes, below the southern border, no one talks about building a wall between Canada and the US. Canadians can come and go as they please. So why is this immigration policy so racist? And it affects our children. The immigrant children in Worcester are treated very different than white immigrants' children.
It's tragic.
I'm sorry.
Ruth, I'd like to reprimand you and say you shouldn't apologize for those thoughts, because those are important things for people to hear. Here where we are in Massachusetts, and I've never been to the state of Texas, and I once was in California and I went to Tijuana, and that's the only time I crossed the border, and no question on the way back, nobody stopped me. That was way back in the 80s. But it is something we need to think about. We talk about a global world. We have dependence on all kinds of other countries, and yet we have perhaps diminished respect for who the people are we're for asking to be in our world with. It is a world. I think you do very important work. And as long as your voice can be heard, people can choose not to listen, but it's still out there. And that's important. So thank you for all those children.
Thank you. I have another meeting, so I need to go, but I want to thank you. Hope we can get together sometime.
Amy can tell you how to find me. I'm pretty
I
easy to
can,
find.
yes. People
Okay.
people care, Ruth. So we're grateful that you brought it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Abby, I see Jane has had her hand up too, and just a guess, it might be on the same topic.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Yeah, Emmy knows me very well. It's on the same topic. But first of all, thank you so much, Abigail. And hearing from Ruth, I can tell from her voice that she's very, very passionate about the community. And this is a fight that we have to keep fighting. And sometimes even the community we are fighting for don't understand why we are fighting so hard. And I come from the African community, and I also do the same fight. But I don't want to talk about that today. I just wanted to appreciate Abby and for you being a teacher and the few stories you told about you and the students. It tells how much passionate you have for the students and students across the board. And through the pandemic, if there is anything that I learned and I appreciated was my conversation, my one-on-one, my text, my Zoom with the teachers, having a child on special ed and having a child that needed a lot of support. I truly got a lot of support from the teachers to a point that it became more. It was a development of a different kind of a relationship. So my son's teacher the other day, she wasn't feeling well, she had COVID, and I would feel obligated to call her every day to ask her how she was doing, and even to appreciate the bus driver, everyone, to appreciate them for what they do to our children. Because I came from a school district that I had to fight until I had to leave. I was like, I cannot imagine. The fight was very tiring. I couldn't do it anymore. And when I went to a school district that my son was getting so much support, I come to understand and appreciate and give back to. Understanding sometimes the teachers will take the kids to the trips and they might give their own money for a child to buy something. And I was like, you know what, next time when there's a trip, then I can put an extra $5 so you don't have to give your own money. So I have so much appreciation for those people that are going an extra mile to understand the system and give extra support to our children. So thank you so much again. We appreciate you as an educator.
Thank you. We good, Amy? All right. All right, so I'm going to move on because we're down to a half an hour. What do we want to think about? We've talked a lot about the survival brain. How do we get out of the survival brain back into the learning brain? How do we find ways where we can free up brain real estate? Literally is what I call it. My kids know it. We do brain maps. And if you want to have a fun day for yourself, take a piece of paper and draw a circle on it and then start dividing the circle. Initially, when I started doing this, most kids divided it like a pizza pie. Then I had kids who started doing circles and filling them in. But what I do is I tell kids, here's how we're going to look at what our brain's doing every day when we wake up. And this was when I was commuting into Worcester every day. And I would say, I wake up in the morning and the first thing I need to know is the weather and the traffic, because that's very important to me. If it's snowing, uh-oh. My children still say, I've been like this forever. Weather and traffic, Mom, weather and traffic. Then I want to think about what am I going to wear today? And of course, that depends on the weather. So that's why weather was important. And then, you know, it also depends on what makes me feel good. If it's a rainy, dreary day, I'm going to wear something I like. perhaps in a color I like, because it's going to make me feel better. I'm going to have more energy. I'm going to enjoy that. I get in the car and I think about, am I going to listen to music or am I going to listen to NPR? And all those things. And then I might think about, what am I going to have for dinner when I get home? And what am I going to do? Did I pack my lunch? Do I want to stop and buy lunch? Whatever it is. These are all the things that take up real estate in our brain. So when we look at the learning brain needs to have space available for the acquisition of new knowledge. When we look at the survival brain has no space. The space is all taken up by the things that get us through. I recently did this for the second time. I did it, I had a child referred to me. You might get the picture that I do everything in my power not to say no to a referral, because typically once kids have gotten through the system to me, there's a reason, as my children say, they're going to become one of your kids' moms. So I usually try to figure out, oh, what is it about this kid that, you know, is going to fit for what I do? And if it's not a good fit, who can I call a favor in on? Because the wait lists are exorbitantly long right now. So I got this kid referred to me, and at the risk of sounding like I'd made a judgment call, I could not pronounce the first name or the last name. So I made an assumption that this child may be from a culture that was different than mine. I was wrong. In my door came this strawberry blonde, freckle-faced Caucasian kid. He was in the foster care system, and he was living in a home where no one spoke anything but Spanish, and he did not. I know, Heather, that was my response. Yeah, I know. This was his third foster home. He'd moved a lot. So I get him. And my colleagues at the time, our office wasn't as big as, I don't sit in the main part of the office anymore. When the practice got big enough, they got this whole second floor. I'm still on the first floor in suite 116, which is only people who treat kids, because some of our kids disturb the adult clients. So anyway, I've got my kid who I nicknamed Ricochet Rabbit, because he just, and people used to say, oh, it's Tuesday afternoon, you've got that kid. This one Tuesday came along, and later on in the evening, a lot of my colleagues said, hey, your kid didn't show up today. I said, no, he was here. Wow, he's great. I didn't have the heart to tell him. We spent the whole time in the bathroom because he got himself locked in the door, and I had to figure out how to get him out. So they hadn't heard him. But I've still got this kid. He's now in 7th grade. And we did a brain real estate with him, and he took his circle. He was about 7 years old. And he filled in all these things. And it was when he started explaining to me his trauma, and I knew why he'd been removed from his home. And for a kid that hadn't been beaten or sexually molested, he had one of the worst traumas I'd ever heard. When he and his sister, and they were separated, they're now together in the same home where they were adopted. When they had misbehaved according to their parents, they were forced, the parents spread rice on the floor, and they were forced to kneel on the rice bare-kneed until the parents thought they had been there for long enough. And sometimes they were kneeling for almost 2 hours. And these were very young children. And he told me this very casually, you know, this is what happened. And as I listened to him, he started putting like bubbles outside of the circle and filling in more things that his brain was occupied with during any given day. And when he ran out of paper, he asked me for another piece of paper. And I looked at this child and I thought, no wonder he's struggling. No wonder they think he has ADHD. He doesn't have any brain real estate left over. He is still in survival brain. He's now in 7th grade, as I said. He's top scholar in his class, but he still struggles with the fact that people find him distracted. And when we sat at the last IEP, I said, you know, I remember doing brain real estate with him over the years, and his adoptive father had saved the pictures. He said, oh, I have pictures of those. And he showed the people at the IEP, all these teachers who were just overwhelmed by what this kid's brain was like, because he was still in survival mode. He still is not secure. It is this, he's been in an adoptive home for now almost 6.5 years. So what does it look like? Do we see the forest or the trees? And if we see the forest, do we see the rocks and the creeks and the ledges and all the other dangers that may be in that forest, even though that's what we're seeing, the forest? What are all the possibilities we look at? If we look at out over the mountains, do we look at the beauty of the majesty, or do we look at how far down we can fall? I frequently think about learning has to do with being in a discovery mode to understand. Can we feel calm about what we're about to learn? Or are we still in a place of a response for trauma where, as kids often say to me, well, I'm not any good at math. So when they go in to have a math lesson, they've already started by saying, I'm not good at math. How do they have any brain real estate left over to learn whatever the new concept is? Are they curious about it? When we're in survival mode, we're not curious about anything. We're reactive. We are looking for, how do I survive this? Are they willing to be experimenting? I do things with kids all the time that are experimenting because we're eating together a lot. And I'll say, well, what will happen if you do that? The other day, a kid had Nutella and the breadsticks. It's fascinating now what they can produce for kids. That was his snack. So he's dipping his breadstick in and he's chewing on his breadstick. And I said, how do you like it? He said, I like it. I like Nutella. I said, what does it sound like? What? I said, what does it sound like in your head when you crunch on the crunch? It sounds crunchy. Loud or soft? Loud. Do you like the crunch? Yeah, I like the crunch. I like crunch when I have the carrots too. You do? I said, yeah, I do. But what did that tell me? It tells me that when he's eating that snack, that crunch is so loud, he doesn't hear me. So now I'm going to stop every time he puts a bite in his mouth. And I'll talk to him when he stops crunching. He went from being defensive, yeah, I like it, to playful as he crunched it, and then he would go, do you want me to put it really close to the microphone so you can hear it? I said, absolutely. Let me hear how loud the crunch is. So now we were no longer defending. We could talk again. Being silly. Being silly is so important. I love being silly. People in learning or discovery mode are not afraid. They're confident. They're not thinking about themselves, but thinking about the action, the activity. What are we doing? Not how do I defend against it? They might even feel a little more than they normally did. I made him listen to the crunch, then he wanted to share it with me. Then we became unified. We became able to, his brain shifted. Does his brain always shift? No, because he's got trauma in his history. Survival brain is completely different from learning brain. Survival brain has black and white thoughts. Learning brain has all the gray in the world. What does it mean? I say to kids all the time, because I actually sit at another angle with myself against the door. And I can turn the camera so they can look out on the ocean when I say, well, what kind of weather is it at your house? Even if they live in the same town I live in, what kind of weather is it? And they're like, well, they look out the window. I don't know if they've ever looked out the window before. I don't even know if they paid attention to what the weather was like. The kids that I have breakfast with, we get dressed for school. I say, look out the window and tell me what the weather's like so we know which coat to wear. How we make decisions, how we think about it. Things can be gray. Things are not clear, hard facts. Tell me more about it. I don't know anything about video games. Tell me why you like it. Survival brain doesn't like ambiguity. I love ambiguity. What do you think you're going to do for dinner? I don't know. Excellent. Let's figure it out. What are the choices? It's Tuesday. Do you get tacos in your house on Tuesdays? I don't have tacos very often. I typically have tacos on the weekends. I don't have enough time to do tacos. I usually have stuff in my fridge. Sorry, I was reading something somebody wrote. Hyper-focused on threat is the survival brain. The learning brain is hyper-focused on everything else. What color is it? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? Do I like it? How do I like it? What do we want to get from all of this? We want to get that we can be open and interested. How many of you are interested in listening anymore? I can't think of the last time I heard Dr. Fauci talk, but I honestly worry about him every single day. And I worry about him because his life has been threatened. And I don't think he's slowed down enough to think about how traumatic that was. And why does that make me concerned? Because Dr. Fauci is brilliant, in my opinion. He studied all of this stuff long before we were ever concerned about it. I remember him during the AIDS crisis, which also tells you how old I am. And he was already the one thinking about how we could manage that. And somebody threatened this man's life, and he still, until very recently, was in front of us all the time, telling us what he thinks. He's not there anymore, and I worry about that. I get afraid of things getting worse right now. I'm not out of survival mode completely. There was one day that there was no one in the hospital because of COVID in this state, one day. And I have a kid who is very hyper-focused on all of this. He is on the spectrum. He's a junior in high school. He's terrified on a daily basis. And all of this makes him worry and feel panicky. And I actually say, me too. I get panicky too. I want this to be over with. I don't want to be filled with doubt anymore. I don't want to be worried anymore. I want this to end. And then I want to figure out what we're going to do. Unfortunately, and given what we talked about a few moments ago with Ruth, I'm going to use the word that I try not to use, but there is no real good other way. Survival always trumps learning brain. It is what we had to do. What can we do? Well, I took a lot of Greek and Roman history when I was in college as not part of my major stuff, but part of learning. And I became a big fan of the story of Sisyphus. Mostly I became a big fan because I learned how to spell Sisyphus. But Sisyphus was the guy who was pushing the rock up the hill. And when I think about our brains and when I think about trauma, I think about that rock. And Sisyphus got it all the way up to the top of the hill many, many times. And when he would sit back and relax, it would roll back down. And then he'd have to start again, getting it up to the top of the hill. When we think about survival brain and learning brain and trauma and the impact on trauma for us, I think about it as Sisyphus and that rock. I think about there are days that it goes great and things go great. And then there are days when that rock is huge and it's really hard to get up that hill and it's really hard to think about. And if it's really hard for us who can think about this intellectually, I can't imagine how hard it is for kids. So if we think about how we can manage those things and we think about what to do, what are the most important things to do? Number one, connect with yourself. Have a real, honest conversation. The kind of conversation you have when you get dressed as the mother of the bride and you look at yourself in the outfit and you go, can I actually walk out the door in this? That real hard conversation, not the one that, yeah, I look good. That's what I have on Thursday afternoon when I want to go out and do errands. What do I really want? How do I learn how to live instead of just survive? What is important for me to learn how to live? For me, two things are really important for me to learn how to live. Laughing. I do not really enjoy turning on the television and having more drama. I really enjoy, when I'm truly desperate, finding a really old sitcom to watch and just laughing. And for me, Third Rock from the Sun is a big one because there is nothing more foolish than that show. Hysterically funny. What do I need? What do I truly need? Not what do I want? My kids get very frustrated because there are days I say, I really want a piece of lemon meringue pie. And they look at me and go, what? I'm like, yeah, I want lemon meringue pie. I like lemon meringue pie. And after I say it 15 or 20 or 30,000 times, they say, just go get lemon meringue pie. Yeah, no, I'm not doing that. Then stop talking about it. Yeah, okay. It's what I want. It's not what I really need. Do I have what I really need? How do I overlook the things that I don't have and give myself permission to get by? I am absolutely positively sure There is no one who gets up in the morning and they say to themselves, I'm going to really screw it up today. But there are many days that it happens. So I'm going to appreciate that I'm going to do the best I can any given day. And at the end of the day, I'm going to give myself a break for whatever didn't go well. I'm going to apologize for what I did wrong. And I'm going to try and be better tomorrow. Listen to my body. Am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I hot? Am I cold? I got dressed this morning and I came into the sunroom's much better. This is what we call the room I'm sitting in, because behind me is usually a very sunny. Oh, the sky's broken too. That's good. But it was 60 degrees in here, and the shirt I had on, I went and I said, I'm going to be freezing doing this training. And I went and put on one of my fuzzy, warm things that I thought winter was over and I could retire. What are my emotions telling me? Am I scared, hungry, sad? Try to connect to those things, try to listen to those things, and try to have a conversation about those things. I can try to fight back those things that I'm going to be at war with myself and I'm going to go back into survival mode. And I don't want to stay there. I want to get into learning mode. Consider every day is a new day and you have all the opportunities open to you, and any of the challenges you face are only your abilities to realize how much you can do to get by them. I listen to kids all the time tell me when something goes wrong, and I say this to my students. My students at WPI I particularly adore, because they come to me and say things like, I didn't do very well on the midterm. And I say, really, what did you get? And frequently they say an 85. And I say, okay, so that's not good? They say, no. I say, okay, did you lose a kidney? And they stop for a minute and then they look at me and they go, Professor, you're not listening. I'm talking about my midterm. I said, I know, I'm talking about your kidneys. Did you lose a kidney? And they look at me and go, no, I didn't lose a kidney. I go, losing a kidney is really bad. You have two, you lose one, you got to revamp your life. No more sports, can't be in contact sports. You probably have to go on a special diet. You got to be really careful of that other kidney. And if they're female, I say, we're talking about if you want to have kids, that may be more challenging. They're like, I didn't lose a kidney. I'm like, then things are good. We got all semester to figure this out. Things are good. You didn't lose a kidney. Move on. What do you want to get at the end of this? Another one of my favorite things to tell people, and now there's a commercial on TV, unfortunately, and I got a kid who works in advertising, and when they hear me say this, they get very frustrated. I don't know what the product is they're advertising, but I really like the commercial. So it really didn't accomplish its goal. But the commercial talks about traveling. Maybe it's a travel agency. I don't know. But it says nobody's going to, go through life at the end of life remembering the size of their flat screen TV. And for years I've said nobody in a funeral goes down the road with a big U-Haul dragging behind the hearse of everything they owned. What they go down the road with is cars filled with the people who loved and cared about them. So what do you want at the end? Do you want to create new routines? For 2 years and some months, I've had new routines. At some point in time, please God, they're going to let me come back into the office. Then I'm going to have to get a new routine. Are there things I worry about that? Oh yeah, I look at my calendar right now and go, oh God, if I have breakfast with all these 7 o'clock kids, that means I leave my house at 5. So now I have to get up at 4. Yeah, it's an hour and 47 minutes from here to Worcester with no traffic. But I hit traffic in Hopkinton always. Are you afraid your world would come crashing down if you take a step back and look at it? How many of us actually look at our world and then make decisions in a non-stressed, non-time-oriented way about what you might like to change? Now, that is one of the biggest things that people have talked about doing during this pandemic. I cleaned out closets, tons of closets that had tons of things in them. It worked well. If all this sounds familiar to you, then you're doing a good job getting out of survival mode and into learning brain mode, into being a functioning person on a daily day. If this sounds scary and traumatic, then I'm going to suggest you're still stuck in survival mode. And what survival mode is doing to you is it's using up energy, literally using up energy. It's like draining your battery all the time. So what do you think you should do about it? You can choose to change one little bit. You can just give yourself an hour every day that you don't decide you have to be in survival mode. You can laugh. I wrote things daily. I stopped doing it when some people started attacking, and I decided, nope, I don't need this. And I used to end every one of these things when the pandemic started with stay well, stay in, stay focused, and dance like nobody's looking. I live alone. I dance all the time, and I don't care who's looking. I turn the music up very loud. I happen to like Earth, Wind, and Fire a lot. And that's what I do. And what I'm very proud of is my 2.5-year-old grandson knows when Earth, Wind, and Fire comes on and turns around and says, Abba, which isn't in honor of the group ABBA, but that's what he calls me. And I say, yep, Earth, Wind, and Fire, you know where the break is on this one. And we dance, because this is the one that does river dance. You can feel happy. You don't have to, but you can. And any number of things can make you happy. Here's what happens when you stay in survival mode for too long. You become addicted to it because it becomes your norm. It becomes what makes you feel normal. It's what the new normal, and I don't enjoy the term, and addiction is very hard to get out of. So you can try and transform yourself and transform the molecules in your brain to being in that learning brain and get out of this survival place. Emotions create chemicals, and chemicals are not merely what emotions are, but they are part of what happens in our brain. And those electrochemical signals that affect the chemistry and the electricity in our brain affect every single cell in our body. And the body's electrical state is modulated by emotions. And so changing the world within our body can change everything about our body, our emotional levels, our chemistries, and all of the things that those are involved with. And I'm going to leave you with my last thought. This was a very brilliant thought by a neuroscientist named Dr. Pert that I've read. My last thought for you all is by a brilliant man who wrote, when we can talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. That brilliant man was Mr. Rogers, who I miss every day. And I think about all the brilliant things he said. And if I want to go back to what Ruth was talking about, two things that happened in my young life was Mr. Hooper died on Sesame Street, and it was the very first time children ever had to hear about what death was like, and Big Bird wept. And Mr. Rogers entertained the police officer in his neighborhood, who happened to be a man of color, who way back in the day when nobody was sharing pools, had the man take off his shoes and socks and stick his feet in the same pool Mr. Rogers was cooling his feet down in. I think those people were brilliant. And I think if we think about those things more often, we think about that we can also change what trauma does to people and children, and think about how we can help them go forward. And I appreciate the fact that you all came and spent your time listening to me, and hope that it is helpful and resonates.
It was awesome. Just as awesome as I knew it would be. Absolutely resonates. Thank you so much, Abby. That was just so much wisdom and relevant to everybody. It didn't seem like anybody was, what is she talking about? Everybody was like, yes, thank you for validating my experience. And that's what we don't do in trauma so often. We don't even let people acknowledge that anything bad happened to them, let alone go there with how might that have impacted you. So I'm always grateful that we usually get like 30 to 100 people that are willing to talk and listen and go deeper with this stuff, because it's painful. But like Mr. Rogers said, it's much worse if we don't go there and we don't talk about it. So we're so grateful to you. If
Thank
people
you.
didn't see it, there's an evaluation link. Look for the helpers. Yeah. That was another Mr. Rogers one, right?
Oh, yeah, that's
That's a
all
bad
I said in the beginning of this thing. Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers. They're out there.
It really works. It is inspiring. Yes. Thanks to all of you that are helpers, and we're continually grateful for what you do, and just even creating space for people to share painful things is powerful in and of itself. And Abby, you did a beautiful job of creating space.
You're very sweet. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, May Mental Health Month, the trauma of psychiatric depression. That's going to be a good one to look forward to. Thank you all very much. And the evaluation will still be there. So if you just grab that link and you can do it, DPH will appreciate that. They're grateful. And thank you all so much for being here. Yay. And Abby, I put enlightened interventions in the chat too, in case anybody wants to find where she practices.
But Amy, you can put the abmsw@comcast.net as the email. That's fine.
Okay, that's
But
great.
I do practice at Enlightened. Yep.
I will share your email too. Thank you for giving permission to do that.
No problem.
And Heidi Sue gave me a shout out, and she also posted that Pathways has a 24/7 hotline. If people are struggling, they're here to help.
All right, I'm off. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Thanks everybody. Bye.
Bye.